When SSS4U dropped, Drake, OVO, and their fans were celebrating what they thought was a major win. However, as the streaming numbers start rolling in, it's clear that things aren't going as expected. Despite the initial excitement and curiosity from listeners eager to hear Drake's return, many of them tuned in just to see how bad the album would be, and they haven't returned for repeat listens. The reality of how SSS4U is performing is far below anyone's expectations. This isn't just a slight dip, it's a significant drop, and now Drake, PartyNextDoor, and everyone around them are scrambling because they never thought they'd see the day where their music is underperforming this badly. Before we dive deeper, make sure to hit like and subscribe. As I mentioned in my previous video, Drake's fanbase isn't happy with me for sharing this truth, but it's important for you to hear what's really going on. Now, when we look at the SSS4U album, the decline in Drake's career is undeniable. Ever since Kendrick Lamar won their beef, there's been a noticeable shift in hip-hop, and it's all starting to add up now with the numbers. Simply put, SSS4U is doing horribly, especially when compared to any of Drake's previous albums from the last decade. This new project saw a dismal debut, with just over 56 million streams on its opening day. To make matters worse, when you compare that to For All the Dog's opening of 80 million streams, that's nearly a 50% drop in the amount of listeners. There's no escaping this. The numbers don't lie, and it's a disaster for Drake. What makes it even more amusing is how, after Drake tried to downplay Kendrick Lamar's success with his diss tracks and manipulate numbers to diminish Kendrick's place in hip-hop, Kendrick's music, despite being out for months, still outperforms this entire Drake album. Tracks like Not Like Us and Luther are still comfortably streaming better than all 21 new songs from SSS4U. Luther is on track to take the #1 spot on the charts, surpassing all the tracks from Drake's new album. It's especially ironic considering that it's a Kendrick Lamar track, a melodic-driven one that stands out much more as an R&B song than anything Drake has on his new project. This song's success is particularly amusing since it's competing directly with Drake in so many different ways. What's even more remarkable is that Kendrick, despite having a catalog half the size of Drake's, is still outstreaming him. Kendrick is breaking records and on his way to becoming the first rapper ever to hit over 100 million monthly listeners. Kendrick's success is all the more impressive because he's never had to compromise his integrity to get here. In fact, he now has over 20 million more monthly listeners than Drake ever did at his peak. Whether we look at quality, influence, or pure numbers, Kendrick stands as the greatest, no matter how you measure it. To quote Kendrick's Super Bowl performance, what we're seeing is that, no matter how much Drake and his team try to manipulate the game, they can't fake real influence. If this makes Drake's fans want to admit that Kendrick is dominating and no one can compete with his momentum, it's still not helping Drake's case. Even beyond the ongoing rap battle, this album from Drake is struggling while other major artists are thriving. Artists like Bad Bunny continue to outstream Drake overall, and The Weeknd just made sure to let everyone know that his album Hurry Up Tomorrow had the biggest streaming debut of the year, surpassing Drake and Party's latest project. It's becoming clear that, outside of the Drake versus Kendrick debate, Drake is losing to many artists right now, some of whom has even tried to diss. When you compare Hurry Up Tomorrow to SSS4U, it's easy to see why the former outperformed Drake's album. It's shaping up to be an early album of the year contender. Looking beyond Kendrick, Bad Bunny, and The Weeknd, Drake's numbers continue to fall short compared to other artists. For instance, Tyler, the Creator's Chromacopia opened with over 80 million streams on its first day, despite having only 14 tracks compared to the 21 songs on Drake's album. It shows how, even with a longer track list, Drake's numbers can't keep up. And let's not forget that even veteran rappers like Eminem are outpacing Drake's numbers. Eminem's latest album performed better than Drake and Party's project, which only highlights how much Drake has fallen. This comparison really puts things into perspective. Drake is now struggling to compete, not just with the current heavyweights, but even with legacy acts. When we compare this collab album to another collaboration like Vulture's One, which faced minimal industry support and was actively prevented from performing well, it still managed to outperform Drake and Party's project for multiple days. This puts into perspective just how poorly SSS4U is doing. On top of that, the second-day streams for this album took an even bigger dive, landing in the 30 million range, which is a clear indication of its struggles. In contrast, A record like GNX actually saw an increase in streams on day 2, surpassing 74 million. The numbers don't lie. Drake is no longer competing with the top-tier rappers or artists across the board. Even when comparing him to legacy acts, he's failing to outperform them. Looking at the bigger picture, it's evident that Drake is no longer on the A-list, nor does he even come close to being part of the elite acts in the music industry. When you consider how poorly his new album is performing, especially on day 2, and how Kendrick Lamar's older tracks are still out streaming it effortlessly, the situation becomes even more glaring. GNX, despite being well past its release, continues to do better than Drake's latest effort. This indicates that in an industry where new releases usually generate buzz and curiosity, there's little interest in what Drake has put out this time. People may listen once, but it's clear they aren't sticking around for repeat listens. When we look at SSS for You, it's obvious this album is faltering badly and struggling to make an impact. Aside from one track where Drake actually raps, the performances on this album are so bland and forgettable, they are not even worth discussing. In an era where every artist is striving to stay relevant, releasing a project like this, especially after the Kendrick beef, is a massive misstep. Even if we compare this album to For All the Dogs, the difference is clear. While both projects are disappointing, at least on For All the Dogs, Drake knew how to stir up conversation with the features, disses, and other elements, even if the music itself fell short. But with SSS for You, the conversation just isn't there, making it one of the worst decisions he could have made in this stage of his career. It's honestly crazy to say, but it seems like Drake's reign is coming to an end. The music just doesn't have the same impact it used to, and it's obvious when we look at the way this album is performing. No matter how much fans and OVO try to spin it, the reality is that Drake simply doesn't have the same pull with the masses anymore. When you compare it to artists like SZA or even the deluxe version of Lana Del Rey's SOS album that came out years ago, you can see that even a deluxe release from years past is outperforming this new record from Drake. And now, Drake is losing to just about every artist he's ever had beef with, which says a lot about where he stands in the industry right now. This album has yet to produce a standout hit, and the only conversations surrounding it are about how disappointing and underwhelming it is. As more streaming numbers come in, it's only going to get worse. Despite Drake's loyal fans at OVO defending him, we're already seeing the usual excuses being thrown around to justify this album's failure. This situation is starting to feel like a repeat of when Drake lost to Kendrick, but refused to accept it, especially with the Hard Part 6 incident. When we compare this release to albums like GNX, there's a clear difference in what grabs people's attention in the music world. One is an album that demands respect and admiration, while the other is just forgettable. Unfortunately, SSS for You falls into the latter category. It's a project that doesn't leave a lasting impression, and that's becoming clear to anyone who's paying attention. Ultimately, while Drake's fans may deny the truth, the reality is that this album is shaping up to be one of the biggest flops of his career. It's not just a low point for Drake, it's a defining moment in music history that marks the end of an era. Everyone will realize that this is when Drake's run officially came to a close. So now that we've gone through all of this, what do you think about the numbers Drake has posted with this album? Let me know your thoughts. Are you shocked by just how poorly it's doing? What do you think is going to happen now as we watch the numbers continue to drop? If Drake and this album continue to flop as badly as it's looking, do you think we'll finally have to admit that he's experienced one of the biggest falls in rap history? Because if these numbers hold up, I think that's the conversation we'll have to start having. I can't wait to hear your thoughts on this. If you made it this far, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps out a lot. And if you want to see just how much worse Drake made things with this album, especially with some of his cringeworthy disses to Kendrick Lamar and Joe Budden, be sure to check out the suggested video.